Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. I was 14 that summer, old enough to be trusted with matches, not old enough to be trusted with judgment. My best friend was Rory, whose dad, Mike, was the sort of man who called any 3-day stretch a man's weekend and made it sound like a right, not a plan. He loaded 2 dented aluminum canoes onto his pickup, threw in a tackle box the size of a suitcase, and whistled for us to hop in. His brothers, Uncle Dale with the sun-leathered forearms and Uncle Kurt with the laugh that always arrived a second late, rode behind us in a second truck. We drove north for what felt like forever, past barns that leaned like tired men, past spruce that thickened into a wall. If you asked me now, at 30, where exactly we went, I couldn't tell you. I only remember the way the road ended in a pull-off spiked with tall grass, and how we nosed the truck into the brush as if we were hiding it from someone. We slid the canoes off their racks, packed them with a cooler, tents, and a half-optimistic case of cheap beer Mike called lawnmower fuel, and pushed into a river that moved like a slow thought. The paddle was longer than I expected. The day burned bright, the water threaded with silver, dragonflies zipping like thrown staples. When the river widened into a lake, the trees fell back and we saw it. A cabin across the water, roof sagged in the middle as if it had been stepped on, porch swallowed by brush. From where we drifted, it looked like an old set from a movie, retired, tired, forgotten. Our camp sat on the opposite shore, a rash of flat gray rocks, a chimney of granite that made the fire feel official. We staked the tents at the edge of the water, boiled sausages, caught nothing, and let the afternoon get lazy. By early evening, Mike and his brothers had found their rhythm, one hand on a rod, the other around a can. They were feeling generous, and stupidity, like smoke, travels downwind. "Take the spare canoe," Mike said, waving a sun-reddened hand toward the far shore. "Stick together. If I hear the whistle, I'm coming." Rory's grin was the kind that dared me to be less afraid than I was. We shoved off, the canoe skimming the lake like a coin. Up close, the cabin proved worse than its silhouette suggested. The roof shingles were furred with lichen. Vines twined the porch posts. A window had a starburst crack like a frozen firework. The front door, paint scabbed off in thumbprints, hung with a latch as useless as a decoration. It was unlocked. The smell hit first. Stale beer, wet ash, something sweet and skunky that clung to the tongue. Inside, light pooled in a dusty rectangle on the floorboards and died before reaching the corners. A card table held a messy sprawl of magazines with airbrushed bodies. A glass bong leaned like a small rocket. A cookie sheet hosted a snowdrift of green crumbs and stems. Bottles clinked softly when the floor creaked. On a shelf, 2 pump shotguns, oiled and casual as umbrellas. We knew better. We did not act like we knew better. We took them down the way dumb kids take down a dare, cradled the weight, peered down the barrels at cobwebbed rafters without considering that holes could appear in things. We never chambered around, never touched the safeties, just stalked room to room whispering freeze at the dust. The house had a couple bedrooms, one with a mattress folded like a taco, one with a line of milk crates under the window. And then the room that pushed the temperature down. Mannequins. 4 of them. The kind from department stores with smooth, blank faces. No clothes. Skin the color of old typing paper. Each wore a wig. A black one chopped blunt at the jaw, a long auburn that fell past the breast mound, a blonde bob, and a gray that curled like grandmother hair. They stood facing different directions, slightly off from square, as if someone had been adjusting them and then been interrupted. The corner of one's wig gaped to show the bald plastic underneath. I couldn't explain why it felt like catching someone undressed. "Let's go," I said, and my voice had a trembling laugh in it that fooled no one. We put the guns back exactly where we'd found them, fingerprints like confessions on the blued steel, and made ourselves leave without running. The lake welcomed us with its indifference. Back at camp, Mike listened with a patience that made me wish we hadn't been brave. His face didn't change at the weed or the bottles, but it tightened at the shotguns. He asked us to show how we'd held them, and didn't scold when we did. When we mentioned the mannequins and the wigs, he stared over our shoulders toward the other shore for a long time, chewing his lip, the beer unopened in his fist. Evening deepened. Somewhere between Rory telling the story to Uncle Dale for the 3rd time and Uncle Kurt insisting the mannequins were for target practice. People do weirder things than you think, kid. We caught a small fish Rory cleaned under Mike's coaching. It tasted like smoke and lake bottom, an accomplishment. The last orange seam of daylight peeled off the water. That's when the motorboat arrived. 2 men. Late 20s, maybe 30s. One wore a camo jacket that didn't match his pants. The other had a ball cap with a bent bill and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. They cut the motor and drifted close, the hull nudging a rock with a hollow tick. "Evening," Camo said. Friendly voice. Careless eyes. "You boys picked a good spot." Mike stood. He had a way of standing that made you notice he was tall. The usual banter spilled out. Weather, mosquitoes, any luck. And then Ball Cap jerked his chin across the water. "Y'all ought to come by our place," he said. "Right there." He meant the cabin. "We've got all we need here," Mike said, polite as a closed door. They stayed. Jokes layered over questions layered over looking. The drinking in their boat seemed to be history rather than plan. They smelled like they'd already had their night. "The boys can hang out with us a bit," Camo suggested, eyes sliding to Rory and me like hooks testing a fish's mouth. "Just the boys," Ballcap added, as if that precision made it safer. "No," Mike said, and his voice lost every soft thing. "They're with me." Silence hung like wet cloth. The men's faces rearranged, smiles lowered, lids heavy. Nobody moved. Then Ballcap laughed, a little too loud. "Suit yourselves." They idled back into the dark. Even after the motor's sound dissolved into night, it felt like they were still there, watching from the seam where water and trees met. That night, Mike and his brothers didn't go to bed. They built the fire up high and sat with their backs to the lake and their eyes on the narrow gap in the trees where the path from the shore came in. From the tent, Rory and I listened to their low voices and the occasional clink of a bottle and the pop of a log. We whispered about the mannequins until we found we were saying the same words over and over because we were trying not to say the one word that felt correct: trophies. I saw shadows move and realized they were only our own. I woke to a sound and realized it was Uncle Dale standing to pee 10 feet from the fire. Each ordinary thing announced itself a second late, which is how fear works when it's not dramatic, just present. Dawn came gray and cool. Mike had the tents broken down before the sun burned the mist off the water. We didn't fish, we didn't stretch, we didn't toast breakfast. We packed. Rory and I kept looking across the lake, expecting the motorboat, the men on the porch, a wig to glint. Nothing. It was supposed to be the perfect birthday surprise for my girlfriend, Lila. She was turning 30, and after years of talking about wanting to hit the slopes for real, I figured this was the year to make it happen. I rented a huge Airbnb cabin in Tahoe, 5 bedrooms, enough space for 10 of us, all her closest friends and their partners. Hot tub out back, foosball in the basement, fireplace in the main room, even a giant kitchen island where you could line up tequila shots if the night demanded it. The first night was classic. Everyone piled in, dropping their duffels, cracking beers, already buzzing on that first night vacation energy. We decorated the living room with streamers and balloons, which, after a few whiskey sodas, became props for increasingly stupid drinking games. Someone put one between their knees and waddled across the room. Someone else popped one by accident on the fireplace poker and screamed like they'd been shot. And yeah, we got messy. There were flirty jokes, the kind of "I dare you" shots where the line between wholesome and a little too horny blurred. At one point my buddy Jordan started chanting, "Birthday kiss," until Lila, red-cheeked and laughing, pulled me in for a long one right in front of everyone. Somebody wolf whistled, somebody yelled, "Get a room." It was that kind of night. The only weird thing? Balloons kept popping on their own. Not constant, not all at once, but every 15 minutes or so a sharp crack. That made us all jump. At first we blamed the heat from the vents, but half the time the balloons weren't even near them. One even burst in the middle of the floor with nobody touching it. We shrugged it off, chalking it up to cheap plastic, and went back to our drunken karaoke rendition of Mr. Brightside. By 2 a.m., everyone had stumbled off to their rooms. Lila and I had the master bedroom upstairs. Across the hall were Jordan and his girlfriend Claire. Next door was Lila's cousin Emily, who'd flown in solo. The rest were downstairs. I remember lying in bed, Lila snoring gently beside me, still a little buzzed and just happy. Until pop. Then another. Somewhere downstairs, balloons kept snapping in the dark. Not a party sound anymore, just sharp, lonely detonations echoing through silence. The second night started normal. We hit the slopes, ate greasy burgers on the mountain, came home sore and satisfied. But by 11:30, everyone was exhausted and went to bed early. I lay awake, shivering a bit. It was colder that night, and decided to go downstairs to adjust the thermostat. The upstairs hallway was dim, the kind of half-light where shadows feel thicker than they should. Claire and Jordan's door was cracked open, bathroom light spilling faintly out. I figured one of them was still brushing their teeth. No big deal. I padded down the creaky wooden stairs, but halfway down I heard it, footsteps behind me. Not loud, not stomping, just the weight of someone on the stairs 2 or 3 steps back. I figured maybe Jordan was grabbing water. I turned, whispering, "You awake, man?" Nobody. Just empty steps. My chest went tight. I made it to the thermostat, punched the heat up a notch, and walked quickly back upstairs. My spine prickled the whole way like eyes were on me. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. After half an hour, still cold, I decided to risk going back down. This time I flipped the hallway light on first. Halfway across the living room, near the foosball table, I heard it clack. The plastic ball rolled across the table by itself, hitting the side with a little ping. I froze. My brain went into overdrive, not the house creaking, not the wind. That was deliberate. Something touched it. I forced myself to stay calm, adjusted the thermostat again, and walked back upstairs without running. But I didn't sleep. The next morning, while we packed up to leave, Claire casually mentioned the balloon popping from the first night. I jumped at the chance to share what I'd experienced, the phantom footsteps, the foosball ball. Her expression shifted instantly. "You're not going to believe this," she said, eyes locked on mine. Then she told me that the previous night, she'd woken up and seen a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. At first she thought it was a dream, but when she blinked, it was still there, tall, motionless, watching. She panicked and shook Jordan awake. The figure vanished the moment he moved. My stomach flipped. The exact same time I'd thought Jordan was following me down the stairs, Claire had seen someone in their room. Emily, who'd been quiet, suddenly piped up. She admitted she'd heard heavy breathing in her room both nights. Deep, raspy, like a man catching his breath just beside her ear. She'd written it off as pipes or maybe her imagination. But her cheeks flushed as she said it, like just speaking the words out loud was giving the memory weight. We all went silent. One balloon popping? Fine. Footsteps on creaky stairs? Okay, maybe the house. But 3 people, 3 separate experiences, linked in time and feeling, that was harder to dismiss. The first thing you should know about that year is that I thought I had it figured out. Remote cabin, steady Wi-Fi connection, a dog who adored me more than people, and a job I could do from anywhere with a laptop and cell signal booster. I'd traded traffic and roommates for pine needles and silence. Most mornings, I drank my coffee on the porch in nothing but sweatpants, listening to crows argue in the trees. The whole thing felt like freedom. It only took a couple of weeks before the woods reminded me that freedom has its price. The first time I heard gunshots, I didn't think much of it. Out there, in hunting country, rifles were just background noise. Loud, sure, but as normal as a car alarm in the city. 2 sharp cracks in the afternoon, echoing off the hills. I whistled my dog, Laika, back from the brush and kept walking. But 2 days later, a truck I didn't recognize rumbled down my dirt road and pulled into the clearing. My chest tightened immediately. No one ever came out there, not unless they belonged. The driver was a wiry man in a beat-up Ford. Window down, he called me over with a smile that didn't make it to his eyes. Claimed he was my neighbor, though his place was at least half a kilometer away, buried beyond the ridge. His first question, "Did I hear those gunshots the other day?" I said I had. He leaned in, eyes twitching the way a drunks do when they're pretending to be sober. Claimed another neighbor was shooting at his house over some land dispute. He didn't ask me to be a witness, didn't warn me about danger, didn't seem to care about much except knowing I'd heard it. His story felt too polished in the wrong places, like he'd practiced it. I already had a bad vibe when Laika started pawing at the ground near the truck. The guy stepped out, crouched, and before I could say anything, he reached for her. Grabbed her collar and tried to flip her over like he was doing some kind of alpha dog Caesar Milan trick. She yelped, twisting out of his grip. "Hey!" I snapped. He backed off, palms raised, and grinned. "Don't worry. I'm a great dog trainer." That was when the real chill crawled into my bones. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge her fear. He looked at me, not her, like the performance had been for my benefit. Then he asked if I had firearms. I should have lied. Instead, I told him no. His eyes narrowed. He nodded like he'd just filed something away. Then he said, "You should come over sometime, mow my lawn. Make sure you bring Laika." The way he said her name made me want to throw up. After that, he left. I stood there in the dirt, my stomach sinking with the realization that I'd just told a stranger with a twitchy grin and a land dispute gun story that I was unarmed and lived alone. He started calling, then texting, asking why I hadn't come by yet. I'd made the rookie mistake of giving him my number that first day, before I'd realized how strange he was. Each message was short, casual, but something about them felt loaded. I brought it up at the general store one morning. The woman behind the counter didn't even flinch when I said his name. "Oh yeah, that guy." She dropped her voice and leaned in. "Don't get involved." Turns out, everyone in the valley knew him. Full-blown alcoholic. Lost his job, lost his wife, lived alone. People avoided him the way you avoid a stray dog with foam on its mouth. That's when the paranoia set in. I'd sit on my porch with a beer and find myself scanning the tree line. At night, I double-checked every lock twice. Laika, normally a fearless explorer, started growling at random corners of the property. One night, dead quiet outside, she went stiff beside me. Ears pricked, hackles rising. Then the growl started, low, guttural, the kind of sound that makes you freeze because your dog is telling you something's there even when your eyes can't see it. The cabin had windows in every room except the bathroom. That meant there was no blind spot, no safe corner, except that tiny tiled space. My imagination went wild. I pictured him creeping through the trees with a shotgun, peering into the glass. Laika's growl deepened. I grabbed the only things I had for defense, a hunting knife and a can of bear spray. I locked us in the bathroom and just listened. My heart beat so loud I swore he could hear it outside. Time stretched. I must have sat on that cold floor for hours before exhaustion finally took me under. Daylight didn't make me feel better. Every twig snap outside was suspect. Every truck engine down the highway made me tense. Sleep became impossible. But it wasn't just him. The place itself started to feel wrong. Too many blind spots. Too much silence. I finally cracked when I realized even my landlords were fucked up. They lived on the property down the road and had 3 dogs of their own. At first, I thought it was harmless when they'd fuss over Laika, giving her scratches and treats. But then I overheard them in their yard one evening, talking about how they could make her like us better than him. Like it was some kind of competition. They started sneak feeding her when they thought I wasn't watching. That was it. I'd had enough of people out there. One morning, I drove into town for groceries. On the way back, I made a decision so fast it felt like someone else had pulled the trigger. I didn't unpack the food. Instead, I threw every belonging I cared about into my old van. No notice to the landlords. No text to the neighbor. I didn't even cancel the lease. I strapped Laika into the passenger seat, cranked the ignition, and tore out of there. My van wasn't insured. My license was expired. I didn't give a fuck. I wasn't going to give anyone out there one more night to figure out how to break me. I drove until the trees thinned and cell service returned, and then I kept driving. Looking back, I know it sounds paranoid, like maybe I overreacted. But here's the thing. Sometimes rural places really do have that hills have eyes energy. On the surface, it's peaceful, wood smoke, sunsets, quiet roads. But beneath, there's something else. People who've dropped out of the grid, who've let rot and anger ferment until they're not quite safe to be around anymore. It was the summer of 2022, one of those years where everything felt heavy back home, and all we wanted was to get away. My family, big, loud, messy, decided to rent a cabin in rural North Carolina for a week-long retreat. There were 8 of us in total: my parents, my 2 brothers, my sister-in-law, my stepsister, and my cousin. Ages ranged from early teens to pushing 60. It was supposed to be the kind of trip where you unplug completely. No phones, no neighbors, just mountain air and space to breathe. The cabin sat tucked into the side of a mountain, surrounded by acres of thick woods. Gravel road winding forever to get there. No cell service the moment you turned off the highway. From the outside, it was picture perfect. A wide porch with rocking chairs, smoke curling from the chimney, picnic tables scattered across the grass. But from the moment we stepped inside, every one of us said the same thing in our own way. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't the cabin itself. It was beautiful inside, wood paneling, stone fireplace, big comfy couches. But it felt like the walls were watching. Like if you turned around fast enough, you'd catch someone leaning in too close. We laughed it off at first. City people paranoia, right? That first night, we did what families do. Burgers on the grill, beers passed around, a few too many for the older kids and more than enough for my dad. Some of us sat at the picnic tables, others lounged in the hot tub out back. For a while, it was the trip we'd all pictured, comfortable, happy, normal. Then at around 10:30 it happened. We were sitting outside, the night thick around us, when a voice came from the woods. A woman's voice. Clear. Confident. Casual. It said one word. Marco. It wasn't whispered, wasn't distant. It was sharp and loud, carried across the grass from the pitch-black tree line, maybe 30 yards away. For a moment, none of us moved. The world just went still. I looked across the table at my stepsister, and her eyes were as wide as mine. The hairs on my arms rose. And then, before anyone could really think, my sister-in-law laughed nervously and called back, "Polo." The second the word left her mouth, the atmosphere changed. It was like the blood drained straight out of us. Everyone froze. My dad, who had been buzzing with whiskey warmth all evening, tried to chuckle it off. Probably some kids messing around. But his face told another story, tight, pale, unsettled. The sound hadn't come from the road. Not from the porch. It came from the woods. And there were no kids. No houses for miles. No reason at all for a woman to be standing out there in the dark, calling a playground game into the void. We didn't wait to see if there'd be a second round. We went inside. Someone locked the door. Nobody said much. We sat in the living room, quiet, eyes darting toward the windows, pretending we weren't scared shitless. That was just the beginning. The cabin sat on a small farm-like property. A few goats wandered the fenced pasture. When we'd arrived, they'd been curious and friendly, nudging our hands, following us as we walked the fence line. After that night, they changed. They kept their distance, pacing along the far edge of the pasture near the woods. At dusk, their behavior turned frantic. They'd scream. Not bleat, scream. A shrill, panicked sound that echoed across the mountainside and jolted us awake in the middle of the night. We figured maybe it was a predator. Coyotes, a mountain lion, something like that. But there were no signs of blood, no injuries, no missing goats. Just that horrible noise. And then came the knocking. The first night, it was light. A soft tap, like knuckles on wood. But not at the front door, at the back wall of the living room, the side of the cabin that faced nothing but trees. A place no person should have been standing. The next night, it happened again. Louder. One solid thud, like a fist, or something heavier, slamming against the wall. Always just once. Always late at night. We grabbed flashlights and went outside. The grass was untouched, the ground too hard and dry for footprints. The trees loomed, thick and silent. We'd stand there, hearts pounding, shining our beams into the darkness until the shadows swallowed them whole. Nothing. It became a pattern, screaming goats, single knocks, silence thick enough to choke on. None of us slept more than 3 hours a night. Even during the day, the woods felt wrong. Too quiet. No bird song, no insects, just that constant pressure in the air, like the atmosphere itself was heavy. A static hum in your skull that made your temples throb. We tried to explain it away. My cousin swore it was skinwalkers. My brother joked it was some redneck trying to scare tourists. My stepsister muttered about spirits, about the land itself rejecting us. Nobody had the guts to say what we all thought, that the voice, the knocks, the silence, the goats, it was connected. We stayed the full week. Looking back, I don't know why. Maybe it was pride. Maybe fear of leaving early, like it would anger whatever was out there. Maybe because, in the daylight, you could almost convince yourself it hadn't happened. But at night, when the trees swallowed the cabin in black, we all felt it, that we were being watched. That if we left the porch, the woods would take us. On the final night, I woke around 2 a.m. to another knock. This one was different, 3 in a row. Boom, boom, boom. Heavy enough that the lamp on the table rattled. I bolted upright. Across the room, my cousin was already awake, eyes wide, clutching her blanket to her chest. Neither of us said a word. We just listened. The goats screamed again, closer this time, pressed to the fence line, their cries rising like an alarm. And then, cutting clean through it all, came laughter. Not a woman's voice this time. Not Marco. Laughter. Deep, drawn out, like someone standing right outside the wall was mocking us. I didn't move until morning. One summer, when I was about 11, my mom decided we needed a vacation. Not the camping sort. She wasn't the type to pitch a tent or sleep on the ground, but something outdoorsy enough to feel adventurous. She booked us 3 nights in a state park cabin. The place was picturesque, almost storybook. Native stone walls, brown plank trim, heavy wooden doors. The kind of cabin you see on postcards from the 1930s. In fact, a wall plaque inside told us it had indeed been built during the Depression by the WPA. A relic of another time. It had everything we needed. A small bedroom for Mom, a little kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 couches in the living room. One was a hide-a-bed that my older sister and I would share. My baby brother, only 18 months old, would get the other couch. Mom planned to take the bedroom for herself. It was cramped but cozy, and for kids who didn't often travel, it felt like a palace. That first afternoon was sunny. Golden light spilled through the west-facing door as we carried bags inside. Mom told me to hang our clothes in the closet near the bathroom. Easy enough, except when I opened the door I froze. The sunshine filled the cabin, painting the trim in warm colors. But the light seemed to stop dead at the closet door. The interior was pitch black, like a hole cut out of reality. No glow reached inside. A shiver ran over me. I couldn't even see the closet rod. I didn't want to step in and feel for it, not with that heavy dark pressing out. Need the flashlight, I told Mom. She fetched it, but the batteries were weak, the beam dim. Even then, the light barely cut the darkness. We could just make out the clothes rack. Strange, Mom muttered, her brow furrowed. But she brushed it off, hung our things, and closed the door. That night, she left the bathroom light on, door cracked, just enough to make a dim glow. My sister and I lay on the pullout, my little brother snuggled on the other couch. Mom tucked herself into the small bedroom. We'd been asleep for a while when I woke, heart pounding, with no idea why. Something felt wrong. I scanned the room. All seemed normal at first, the faint bathroom glow, the quiet breathing of my sister beside me. But when my eyes drifted to my brother's couch, my stomach dropped. There was a man leaning over him. Tall, lean, wearing a tan trench coat and a 1940s-style fedora, the brim shadowing his face. He stood bent forward, studying my baby brother like a specimen under glass. My throat locked. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then my brother's eyes opened. He looked straight up at the man and screamed. Not a cry, not a whimper. A shriek that ripped through the cabin. The man faded. Not like he walked out, like he dissolved into nothing. One moment solid, the next gone. Mom came running, flipping on lights. My brother thrashed in terror, clutching at the air. My sister sat up groggy, rubbing her eyes. What's happening? She mumbled. There was a man. I yelled, half hysterical. Right here, over him. Mom checked the front door locked. She grabbed a skillet from the kitchen and swung it like a weapon as she searched the bathroom, the closet, every corner. Nothing. My brother clung to my sister's neck, wailing, too afraid to go back on the couch. Finally, Mom gave up and carried him into her room. She left the kitchen light on this time, every corner bright, before we finally drifted into restless sleep. The next morning at breakfast, Mom did something she'd never done before. She talked about ghosts. She explained calmly, like a teacher, that some souls become lost or confused after death. That they might wander searching. That they couldn't harm us. If we pray for them, she said, sometimes they go away. We nodded, though I didn't feel reassured. That day we went hiking. We picnicked. Tried to act normal. But when night fell, dread seeped back in. Again, Mom left the bathroom light on, door cracked. Again, my sister and I curled up on the pullout with my little brother between us, refusing the other couch. At some point, I fell asleep. Then suddenly I was wide awake. I scanned the room. Nothing at first. And then I saw him. He emerged from the closet door. Not through it. From it. As if the shadows themselves peeled open and let him step out. Same tan coat. Same fedora. Same silent, steady walk. He crossed the kitchen, every step deliberate, until he reached Mom's bedroom door. He slipped inside. I wanted to scream, to warn her. But I was paralyzed again, terror anchoring me. My pulse thundered in my ears. A moment passed. Then another. And then crash. The sound of breaking glass, a lamp toppling. Mom's voice, sharp and commanding. Out! Get out! Lights flared. We all bolted upright. Mom stood in the bedroom doorway, shaking, her bedside lamp shattered on the floor. Her voice was steady, but her face was pale. Pack tomorrow. We're leaving. She told us what she saw, the man at the foot of her bed. At first, he was shadowy, but as she focused, his details sharpened. The coat, the fedora, the belt cinched around his waist. Then she looked at his face and froze. There wasn't one. Instead, an automotive shock absorber, black metal, coiled, emerged from the neck of the coat and disappeared into the hat. No eyes, no mouth, just machinery where a head should have been. He raised his arms, like a monster from an old film, or like a priest blessing a congregation, and began to fall forward onto the bed. Right before he landed, he vanished. That's when Mom knocked over her lamp and water glass, lunging for the light. We cut the vacation short. Mom doubted the park would refund us for the last night, but she didn't care. We packed as soon as the sun rose. My sister had to fetch our clothes from the closet. I refused to step near it again. She shone the flashlight into its unnatural dark, muttering under her breath the whole time. We drove home in silence. Years passed. I grew up, moved away, built a life.